Hey guys, welcome to Social Studies. This is going to be my second video for you. I'm really kind of picking up basically where the last one left off. It's only about 10 years later in time that we have another situation where a pope is trying to exert their power and their authority in a different way. So building this kind of sense of understanding how the pope really exerted power in Europe during this time. We're going to talk about the Crusades because they're really misunderstood. And there's a lot of bad information out there. And usually the story goes something like this. A bunch of big bad Europeans put crosses on their shirts and went to go murder a bunch of Muslims and boo hoo 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 hoo. And that's not at all what happened. Were there a lot of Christians? Yes, involved. Were they attacking the Muslims? Yes. Did the Pope call on Christian armies to go and invade? Yes, and we'll get to all that. But they're so much more complicated than that. And it's important to know the background of this event if you're going to really understand it. So I'm going to do my very best to explain a very complicated topic in a simple way. So let's get started. How did this all begin? First of all, it begins not with the Europeans invading the Middle East and going and attacking the Muslims. It begins with the spread of Islam. We haven't really talked about that, so I'm going to try to summarize it for you here. But basically, Muhammad took over a large portion of Arabia when he came to power, and then after him, his followers spread out from the Arabian Peninsula into the Middle East as well as Northern Africa. And then the Umayyad Caliphate, which is the real empire that grows out of this, takes the rest of North Africa, invades its way into Spain, only to be stopped by the Franks at the Battle of Tours. Otherwise, they might have taken all of Europe, who knows? And makes their way all the way up into Afghanistan. They're also pushing on the borders of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and threatening their territories in what's now modern-day Turkey. All of this is done through military campaigns and spread. It's a very rapid spread, occurring from about 600 to 750 AD, and then on to 1000 AD as it kind of continues. And it follows the fall of Rome, about 100 years after it. Muslim empires start growing, and they achieve their golden age in this time. So in the process, though, they're invading North Africa, the Middle East, areas that were Roman, that were part of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, again, had become Christian. So when the Europeans see formerly Christian lands being invaded by Arab Muslims, and elements that used to be part of the Roman Empire, something that they really clung to as part of their identity, they see this as an opportunity to retaliate for an invasion of their territory, certainly into Spain and things. And so from a European perspective, this is not an invasion of the Middle East. This is a retaliation, a fighting back against an invasion that's been happening for hundreds of years, where formerly Christian and formerly Roman territory has been taken over by these Islamic kingdoms in their golden age. So that's really important to note. It's not Europe attacking the Middle East. It's Europe retaliating, fighting back against a spread of Islam in these areas. Is it somewhat a battle of religions? Yes, because the ruler of the territory is going to spread their religion where they go. But again, that is not really what's motivating most people in either country, although it does certainly play a role, and the Pope certainly plays a role in bringing that up. So the other really important thing that you need to understand for background for the Crusades, besides the fact that it's a response to Muslim invasions over a period of time, and the Crusades themselves are over a period of hundreds of years. So this is really an oversimplification of hundreds of years of expansion and contraction among different kingdoms in the medieval period, is the schism. So before this begins, while the Muslim kingdoms are spreading and growing, and it's the golden age of Islam, and a little bit before our last discussion of that competition between the Pope and the King, there is going to be a problem in the church. And that is, you need to understand what the Pope is. The Pope is the head of the Catholic Church. At this time, he's the head of the church in Europe, but he's essentially the Bishop of Rome. So Rome had the biggest church in Europe and was the most important one, and so the Bishop of Rome was the most important bishop. So he takes on this special name Pope. And again, Peter was the first bishop of Rome, according to Catholic tradition. So he takes that on, and the other bishops in Europe tend to follow what the Bishop of Rome says, because he's the bishop of the biggest, most important church. So he is that. But in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, in the Byzantine Empire, Rome is not the biggest city. And in fact, Constantinople, at many points in this time, is a bigger, more prosperous city than Rome is at this time. So the Bishop of Constantinople, who's referred to as the Patriarch of Constantinople, also believes that he should be the head of the church, that his opinion should be what's most important. And generally in the East, the other churches follow him. This is fine until they disagree on a major topic. And so there's a big church council, and the Bishop of Rome takes one side, and the Bishop of Constantinople takes the other side. So the Pope takes one side, the Patriarch takes the other side, and they get in this heated debate and get mad, and they disagree, and they both decide the other is a heretic, which means that they're wrong and they're defying the faith. And they both excommunicate each other. The Pope excommunicates the Patriarch excommunicates the Pope. And that's huge, because remember we talked about in the last one, excommunication means you're cut off from God. It means you're damned to hell. It means no. So anybody who follows your religious authority is viewed as a heretic too by the followers of the other one. So now this creates a massive schism, a split between the Western Church and the Eastern Church, because the European bishops side with the Pope. They're not going to challenge him. And the Eastern bishops side with the Patriarch. And from this point on, everyone in what now becomes the Eastern Orthodox Church looks at the Roman Catholic Western Church as heretics, as wrong, as all of them essentially being excommunicated and cut off from God. And everyone in the Western Roman Church, the Catholic Church, views everyone in the East as heretics, as excommunicated, as being kicked out of the church. So while they're all Christians and they only have minor disputes among them, at this point in time, they see the others as heretics and as enemies. And this schism in Christianity really divides the world at this time, and it cuts them off, and it's going to set the tone for this whole thing, because beyond just the excommunication, the Patriarch and the Pope are vying to see who is more powerful. There is a real power struggle between the two of them in wanting to be the leaders of the entire church. So both of them are looking for opportunities for it. So what's going to happen is the Byzantine Empire is in trouble. As this map shows, the Seljuk Turks, who came along after the Umayyads, will take Asia Minor, what's now Turkey, and they're on the doorsteps of Constantinople. They've taken the entire eastern half of the Eastern Roman Empire, and the Byzantine Empire, the emperor is weak, he feels weak, he needs help, and so in desperation, he says, where can I look for help? And what he does is he winds up sending letters to Europe, trying to get mercenaries from Europe to come support him in fighting the Turks, but he also sends letters to China. So that is one of the reasons I argue this is not primarily a religious conflict. It doesn't begin in a religious sense. It begins with the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So maybe the Chinese will come, or maybe the Europeans will come, and they'll help send some warriors, and I can pay them, and we can drive out the Turks and rebuild the Byzantine Empire. That's the inciting incident. The Chinese don't come. There's no Chinese crusade. That would be very interesting, but not real. The Europeans do. And they come largely because the Pope sees an opportunity. So when the Byzantine emperor calls for aid, Pope Urban II sees a chance to do something that Gregory never could, to assert his power over the Eastern Orthodox Church and over the Patriarch. We will go help our Christian brothers, and they will have to bow before me. And over the kings, and to say, look, this is bigger than all of us. So he calls for a crusade. He calls for Christians in Europe to go and defend their Christian brothers in the East and to retake the Holy Land. And he gives this very dramatic speech, and there's a couple different versions of it, and really sets into motion a chain of events that's probably much bigger than he really even imagined. And for his own power, leads to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths and chaos over the next 200 years. But number of kings listen to the Pope's call, especially these lesser kings, gather armies and go to the Holy Land, because among other things in this call, he says, if you go and die in crusade for any reason, you drown, you eat some bad food and get food poisoning, or you die fighting, your sins will be forgiven and you'll go to heaven. That's not how the Bible works. Again, just like excommunication is not how the Bible works. But the Pope claimed he could do this. And so anybody who'd maybe been a criminal or maybe done some really bad things goes, well, I'm going to go fight in the Crusades, because if I die, I'm going to heaven. That's a powerful motivator for people in this time. And so this promise sends tens of thousands of Europeans marching into the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Land, and they get there, and the Byzantines are like, that's a lot more than we thought. And where are you going? And you're supposed to be working with us. And they just kind of ignore the Byzantines and invade Jerusalem and retake Jerusalem. So that brings us to the First Crusade. The First Crusade is really quite successful. Tens of thousands of European mercenary soldiers show up and they push back the Muslims. Now, I say successful, but look at this tiny sliver of land that they take back compared to that massive Muslim empire that I just told you. We call it a success because they got Jerusalem, but they took a fraction of the Muslim empire. In the preceding years, the battle will go back and forth, and after a while, they find themselves in trouble. So the Pope calls for a second crusade. And then the second crusade isn't very successful. They don't take much back. This guy named Saladin comes, and he's a Muslim general who's just a genius. He takes back Jerusalem, and for his lifetime, it stays in their hands. And this leads to the Third Crusade, which is the crusade that brings the most fun crusade stories, like Robin Hood basically comes out of it, because Richard the Lionhearted, the King of England, marches down to fight on Crusade, and then the evil Prince John takes over, and Robin Hood helps the rich and helps the poor and robs the rich. Anyway, if you want that story, it's backgrounded by the Third Crusade. So this English army shows up, and there's also this Holy Roman Emperor who comes, Frederick Barbarossa, and he has an army, and he gets like halfway there and jumps into a river in his armor and drowns to death. And then they're like, oh, dude, our king died. That's a bad omen. Let's go home. But anyway, you have the epic battles between Saladin and Richard the Lionhearted and others. And again, it kind of ends in a stalemate where they both give some concessions to each other. Christian pilgrims can visit the Holy Land, but they don't retake everything. And then you have a bunch of failed crusades after that, really. You have the Fourth Crusade, which is maybe my favorite because it basically involves this massive army of Europeans showing up, making it to Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world, and burning it to the ground. They sack Constantinople. Let's go fight the Muslims. Oh, wait, there's some Christians we can kill instead. Fail. Epic fail. And then they turn back and go to Europe because they take all the money and the gold from Constantinople. They're like, I'm good, I got stuff. And this is why I really don't think the arguments that say the Crusades are really a religious war hold a candle. There is a religious element, but they're about money and they're about power. And they are not one united front. A lot of them involves Christians actually attacking Christians. The biggest event of the Fourth Crusade is the sacking of the greatest city in the Christian world, because these Western Christians view the Eastern Christians as heretics and as others. So it's kind of fair game. And that really shifts power away from Constantinople. In a lot of ways, this call for help winds up being the death knell of the Byzantine Empire. They will last for another couple hundred years, but in decline, slowly decline until the Muslims will eventually take Constantinople a couple hundred years later. But they never recover, really, from the Crusades. And so one of the lasting impacts of the Crusades, awkwardly enough, is Western Christians destroying an Eastern Christian empire. Another one of the lasting impacts, though, is the reconquest of Spain, which I don't have time to get into, but you can look it up. They call it the Reconquista. The Spanish will take over the rest of the Spanish peninsula away from the Muslims, and that has a profound effect on Europe in some ways. But ultimately, they do very little to the Muslim empire. They're a border skirmish for the Muslims. They never get close to Baghdad and the capitals of these Muslim empires. They never get close to threatening the actual centers of power. It's on the fringe of Europe. It's on the fringe of the Muslim empires. Very little land is actually exchanged between sides. And so I think they're blown out of proportion. They're really not significant. What does end these Muslim empires in the golden age of Islam is the Mongols. Is that same threatening force that shakes up the world about 300 years after this. That's what does it. The Crusades are they're a border skirmish. And at their end, the Mongols come and sack Baghdad, and they destroy these things, and we don't talk about that. But that's what actually destroys the golden age of Islam. The Crusades, they're small. So they are significant. They do bring a spread of new ideas from the Muslim world into Europe, and people bring back all this stuff from Byzantium, and it declines the role of Byzantium and gives increased power to Venice and Italy, and Europe is going to kind of rise out of it and then really become significant. but they're not just a holy war, so don't fall for that. And their biggest impact really isn't the death. Thanks, guys. See you next time.